Welcome back to my reading, review, and analysis of ReZero Arc 5. I just wanted to say thank you all for the amazing support so far. I never thought that ReZero videos would do as well as they do, and it really means a lot to me how you guys have come through to support the channel. But let's just get into the review. Phase 2 left off on Subaru and Crusch encountering the Sin Archbishop of Lust, Capella. And when we open back up, surprisingly, Subaru isn't dead. Subaru has to come to terms with another L in a long series of L's in this arc, as his foot is completely reattached with charred skin. Capella dripped her blood into both Crusch and Subaru's wounds, healing them but also containing a curse. Crusch feels immense pain from this curse, but Subaru does not. He is also able to absorb parts of the curse from her. This is another long list of resistances that Subaru is building up to the things in this universe. Also, just a quick aside, but Anastasia's scarf is fucking echidna. This quite literally blew my mind, and the relationship between Fox Echidna and Anastasia is like the one that Tea Party Echidna wanted with Subaru, without the contract, living vicariously through someone else to learn as much as possible. This is relevant because of the demands that the witch cult makes while holding Pristella. Number 1, Gluttony wants an artificial spirit. What he means beyond this is unclear, and we're also not sure if he's talking specifically about the Fox Echidna or Beatrice, as they're both artificial spirits, given that not even Julius could tell that Echidna was on an Anastasia scarf. I have to imagine that they do not know of her existence. Number 2, Sirius wants the Book of Wisdom. Now, you might be wondering, the Book of Wisdom, weren't those both destroyed in fires? Well, surprise, Otto has the charred remains of Roswell's book. We'll get to that later, though. Number 3, Capella wants 20 people who love each other to be sent to the Central Waterway. What does this entail? I have no idea. I know I try to save light novel changes for the last parts of the video, but this one seems pretty important. In the light novel, her goal is actually to retrieve the witch's remains that are in Pristella. If we keep in mind that Pristella is a town on the water, and with potential of being completely submerged, and think about Typhon, the witch of pride who died in a flood, it becomes clear who they're after. Another interesting thing about Typhon is how she is named after a scattered disk object, named after the monster Typhon in Greek mythology. The disk object also has a moon named Echidna, who also, in Greek mythology, is the monstrous mate of Typhon. Finally, Regulus wants to hold a wedding with his new bride, Emilia. We do see Al shed some doubt on this being their ultimate goals, but I wonder if later in the web novel we'll get the reveal that they're trying to obtain the remains of Typhon. I've mentioned in the previous 2 videos that for Subaru, Arc 5 feels like an ultimate test of his growth thus far. Occasionally, I read the Witch Cult translation comments for a chapter just to see what people were thinking when it was released, since I'm reading this so far in the future, and wow. There is a dangerous lack of reading comprehension in that comment section, mostly surrounding the question of, why doesn't Subaru just die and retry? While it's wild to me that somebody made it this far into the series and doesn't understand this, I'll answer. Throughout the series, we see Subaru have almost a complete disregard for his own life, which comes to a climax in Arc 4 with him getting comfortable with the idea of throwaway lives. This all stemmed from his crumbling self-worth and his idea that the only thing he has to offer his loved ones is his own life. It isn't until his encounter with Satella in the witch's graveyard that he's finally asked why he himself isn't included amongst the ones he wishes to save. Subaru from this point onwards changes his mission. He will succeed without relying on return by death to prove that he offers more to his loved ones than just that. Subaru using return by death willingly would go against his current growth, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that he hasn't felt cornered enough to have to rely on it again. We could see him regress and go back for a brief moment, but still, that's why he isn't doing it currently. If you're one of the people who didn't understand, I hope that helps. Subaru has a conversation with Anastasia and Julius about the realistic outcome of this attack by the witch cult. People are going to die. Subaru, however, rejects this entirely, stating how he will save everyone once again. To me, this conversation was fascinating. I think it accomplishes one of 2 things, but not both. It either 1, sets the tone to expect casualties, or 2, sets the tone for yet another total Subaru victory. I personally find number 1 to be much more interesting. Not only will it be a more realistic outcome of a full-on assault, but it also puts a further final test on Subaru's growth and mindset. Does this conversation remind you of anything? In Arc 4, after Subaru defeats Roswell, there is one sentence in particular that Roswell says to him: "You have rejected loss, chosen to salvage everything, and you will hurt for it. You will repeatedly suffer wounds beyond repair, repeatedly suffer loss, frantically attempt to regain what you lost, the invisible hurt compounding perpetually." This to me sets up Arc 5 to be a tragic one. To further this expectation, the first shelter visited by Subaru, Garfield, and Al is one that has completely wiped themselves out. We see Subaru learn to detect when one might be under the authority of wrath, and I've seen theories that the more Subaru is exposed to an authority, the more resistant he becomes, hence why he wasn't resistant to it at the very start of this arc. This would make sense. However, he was able to see the unseen hand immediately upon his first encounters with Betelgeuse. Additionally, he was never affected by Gluttony's authority and has been able to remember Rem just fine. Subaru is just that guy. The situation at the shelter leaves Subaru more or less at a loss. After talking all of this big game to Anastasia and even Roswell before about saving everyone, he wasn't able to. Garfield stumbles looking for a goal and calls Subaru his only light in a world of darkness. Al speaks up and calls Garfield out on his dependence on Subaru. These few chapters mark my absolute favorite stretch of Arc 5 so far. It is purely character-driven greatness. Al tells Garfield that placing so much expectation on one man can only do Subaru harm, and essentially summarizes Subaru's dilemma throughout the series of trying to save it all. In all the previous arcs, he was successful. However, Arc 5 proves that to be a maybe impossible task, and Al suggests that Subaru drop everything and focus on what he finds most precious to himself. He calls Subaru out on trying to carry it all on his back, something he was supposedly not trying to do anymore. How could he possibly save everyone when he found out the people of the shelter were massacred? Subaru was built up for 4 arcs to never give up and to save everyone, but now he's being confronted with harsh reality. You can't. While Subaru is trying to accept help from people, expectation seemingly finds its way back on his doorstep. The trust of Anastasia, Garfield, Al, Reinhard, and Wilhelm, all people he admires deeply and trusts, slowly gnaws away at his sense of self. The anxiety of all of these massive figures has not lifted even after his confrontation with this feeling in Arc 4. It was but a momentary reprieve. All of this still rests on his shoulders and the feeling is crushing him. He is afraid of his real self being exposed, feeling pathetic, weak, and hopeless. Subaru is a textbook example of imposter syndrome, and now he's staring down the barrel of an even heavier load, being asked to be the one to raise the morale of the citizens of Pristella by making a radio announcement. The chapter where he finally gives the speech is something I can only describe in one way: fucking amazing. The way I viewed it is that this speech is in some ways a follow-up to his speech with Rem in episode 18. He acknowledges his faults, still thinks he's weak, and trembles as he speaks, but this time, he knows that he can't give up. Instead of dragging himself down, he uses how he feels to bring everybody up and inspire hope within the city. He used Sirius's own authority against the witch cult, not by posturing himself as a hero to the people of Pristella, but by making the citizens feel like they are heroes. I fucking love Subaru. I am very glad that Reinhard returned, and it wasn't just immediately resolved. They held a proper interrogation more or less as to why he wasn't around when they needed him most. He is the one person who is equivalent to a nuclear weapon, that for some reason wasn't launched in a nuclear war. There needs to be discussion and investigation as to why. Shortly after, we also get to see that Kiritaka saved Otto and died in the process. This, personally, I do not trust at all. Someone introduced alongside Liliana dying unceremoniously and essentially off-screen seems way too easy. Kiritaka is either alive and captive, or alive and not on our hero's side. Oh yeah, and Otto has the Book of Wisdom. Otto took the burnt Book of Wisdom from Roswell's defeat and was hoping that he could have it restored in Pristella. Why, you might ask? The way he puts it is that he wants to make sure he can trust Roswell on their team. He wonders if Roswell could have made a contingency plan long before the events of Arc 4 at the Sanctuary, and if he restores the book, he'll know if Roswell is trustworthy or not. Now, is there some potential downside of restoring the Book of Wisdom? Yeah, probably. We're already seeing the problem of its existence here with the witch cult looking for it and somehow knowing it was here. Speaking of them somehow knowing it was here, I am officially going to add to my list of expectations that someone here is a traitor. The highest person on the suspect list currently is Kiritaka. There's just far too many coincidences. Sure, the witch cult is here to get the remains of Typhon, but the timing of them being here at the same time as every single camp running in the election seems a bit far-fetched. On top of that, the witch cult somehow knew about the artificial spirits being here and also the Book of Wisdom. Something's not quite right. But on the flip side, I'm unsure how Kiritaka would know about all these things as well. So unless he knows more than I think, he maybe could not be a suspect, but still, he's my only idea. We also get confirmation that somebody in the witch cult has necromancy type powers and that they exist at all within the universe. Both of the fighters we saw in phase 2 have been long dead, and Sphinx the witch was named to have these kinds of powers. Sphinx was actually mentioned in a side story that I did not read, thank you Discord, and some cut Arc 4 content demonstrates that Sphinx was the first failed clone made by Echidna. The camps reunite once more and we begin to finally get matchups for the Battle of Pristella. But first, we also get some extrapolations on some parts about the Estrella family drama. Reinhardt's nice guy persona clearly comes from the emotional abuse and neglect he had suffered due to the blame of Wilhelm's wife's demise being placed on his shoulders. The timid sword saint and his willingness to accept blame is clearly a product of his upbringing. Subaru informs the camps about the powers of all the enemies, mentioning how authorities are a pretty evil power set. It made me wonder if it will ever be discovered that Subaru has an authority, and how everyone would react to that. Our first matchup is created thanks to Reinhard going to download moredivineprotections.com and obtaining the Divine Protection of Judgment to tell us what Liliana is capable of. I think that we're supposed to infer from this that, for some unknown reason, Reinhard is capable of just yoinking Divine Protections. I think that we can also infer what happened to the previous Sword Saint. Moving on, my prediction was correct, and we will see Liliana be used against Sirius alongside Priscilla and Al. Wilhelm and Garfield will be up against Lust, Julius and Ricardo against Gluttony, and finally, Reinhard and Subaru against Greed. These matchups make sense, and I think Lust will provide the most trouble if I had to guess. We get a POV switch to Emilia inside of Regulus' sex dungeon, where they finally have an encounter with each other in which we find out that Regulus spits absolutely zero fucking game. It's embarrassing. He straight up asks Emilia if she's a virgin. Regulus alongside Al are the two characters I'm most interested in hearing from at this point. Regulus in particular is a massive hypocrite. He rants and raves about his rights to Subaru Subaru, but for his wives, the ideas that reside within them do not matter, only what he knows and believes. Regulus doesn't even do anything with these women. He asks if they're virgins and then marries them, and then that's it. It's all in pursuit of greed. As the Sin Archbishops are clearly inspired by Christianity, Regulus probably views virginity as one dedicating oneself wholly to God and his kingdom, or as somebody as conceited and self-centered as Regulus, to himself. In further irony to his belief set, Christians tend to view monogamy as paramount to marriage, yet here Regulus is with his harem. Everything about him is a walking, talking contradiction. For the final parts of Phase 3, we see Emilia telling Regulus what is on her mind regardless of the consequences, something I've always enjoyed about her, and then boom, Subaru and Reinhardt are on the scene, and God does Subaru's hand not look good after sucking up some of Crusch's curse juice. That's all for Phase 3. For the light novel differences, there are quite a few between this phase. In the novel, while the offensive is being launched on City Hall, the Anastasia camp is attacked by Sirius. The city of Pristella is overrun by monsters made of flesh, an element entirely missing from the web novel. The city was also partially flooded from Tower 1, where Capella is, but it wasn't her doing. Otto was attacked by Gluttony at Tower 2, which narrowed down the location of the remaining witch cultists. Anastasia does not reveal that Echidna is her scarf to everyone. The conversation between Anastasia, Al, Subaru, and Garfield went a bit differently, mostly with it happening a little bit later, and with Al's voice wavering when talking about how the witch cultists are kind of like pests. The Emilia content is shifted to be near the beginning of the volume instead of the end, and finally, Emilia was using a conversation mirror in Regulus's whack-ass castle to leak information, and as she was desperately hoping the mirror wouldn't connect to a witch cultist, it just so happened that it was picked up by Al. Emilia also states Al reminds her of Subaru. Just some interesting details to think about. The solitary thing that I did not like about this phase was that sometimes the pacing felt really slow. Reading chapters felt like there were only one or two notable things happening at a time, but I can also easily forgive that given it's clear things are about to pick up dramatically. Chapters 40, 41, and 42 were some of my favorite ever, with wonderful Subaru characterization and progression. Al and Regulus are two absolute standout characters who I'm extremely interested to see more of. The Reinhardt interrogation was good, and I think the Estrella family drama plotline is being executed quite well, and I'm absolutely loving the element this phase introduced of not being able to save everyone, especially how it calls back to Roswell's dialogue at the end of Arc 4. Okay, finally expectations time. First things first, let's look at the previous expectations. Subaru has in fact united the royal candidates against the witch cult. I'll consider this one a success. Subaru will fall pretty far mentally. Yeah, this one's looking more and more untrue as time goes. Emilia will get to do something that makes her stand out. Still half fulfilled. I'm hoping she isn't only going to act as a damsel in distress here, and we actually see her help Subaru and Reinhardt take out Regulus. Cool Subaru action scene, still half fulfilled, but oh boy, we might get one now. Liliana was in fact instrumental in the planning on the attack of the witch cult, so I'll take that W. Kind of an obvious one though. Garfield's mother's memories are with Gluttony. No development on this one, gonna keep it at neutral. So for the fourth person, it turns out there already was one. It's an extremely small detail in the anime, but Flugel did in fact write in Japanese on the tree, so I'll strike this one from the record for now. For new expectations, let's add Arc 5 will be a tragic arc that teaches Subaru he cannot save everyone despite his best efforts. Kiritaka is not dead. And finally, there is absolutely a traitor amongst them, whether it be Kiritaka or not. That is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the funny YouTube algorithm. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm never incorrect about anything, never have been, never will. And finally, you can join my Discord down below where we talk about My Hero Academia and ReZero and Jujutsu Kaisen and stuff like that. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate the support, guys.